Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really interesting idea, constitutive panpsychism.
Right. It's certainly been getting a lot of attention lately, hasn't it? In philosophy, but also even among some neuroscientists.
Yeah, I've seen names like Christoph Koch mentioned, Judy too, and there are whispers, maybe even Sam Harris finds it.
Right.
Well worth thinking about.
Exactly. So it feels like a good time to really dig into it, look at what it claims, and, critically examine the challenges it faces.
Definitely. So, for everyone listening, whether you've heard of this before or it's brand new, we're going to break down this alternative to, let's say, standard physicalism.
Our goal is really clarity. What are the core ideas, and what are the big conceptual hurdles?
Okay, so let's start with the absolute basics. The central claim. What is it?
Well, fundamentally, it says consciousness isn't something emergent. It doesn't just arise when matter gets complex, like in a brain.
So not like wetness emerging from H2O molecule.
Kind of the opposite, yeah. Panpsychism argues consciousness is intrinsic to matter. It's there right at the bottom level.
Bottom level meaning, like elementary particles.
Yeah.
Electrons, quarks.
Precisely. The idea is that alongside properties we already accept, like charge, spin, mass, there's also some fundamental, maybe very basic form of experience.
Like an electron has its own little micro-consciousness.
That's the evocative picture, yes.
Yeah.
A tiny spark of subjectivity inherent in the particle itself.
Okay, and why? What's driving this sort of counterintuitive idea?
A big driver is the famous hard problem of consciousness.
Right. How does subjective feeling arise from purely physical stuff?
Exactly. Mainstream physicalism really struggles with that. Panpsychists look at that struggle and say, maybe the problem isn't with finding an emergent mechanism. Maybe the problem is assuming the fundamental stuff isn't conscious to begin with.
So they see it as a limitation of materialism itself.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
They propose that consciousness, in some form, has to be part of the basic furniture of the universe. It's a response to that explanatory gap in physicalism.
Okay, I can see the motivation. But does it actually solve the problem or just shift it? This brings us to the first major point, the problem of explanation, right?
That's a key critique. In philosophy, we talk about the reduction base.
The fundamental building blocks, the things you use to explain everything else that you don't explain further.
Exactly. The irreducible elements of nature. Think physics, fields, particles, forces. A good theory aims for a small, powerful reduction base.
So what's the critique of panpsychism here?
The critique is that it doesn't really explain consciousness. It just adds it to the reduction base.
It says consciousness is fundamental and stops there.
Pretty much. It stipulates that elementary particles have consciousness, like they have mass or charge. But it doesn't tell us why or how they have it or what its nature truly is at that level. It just declares it fundamental.
So it's more like defining the problem away rather than solving it. Some might call that a cop-out.
That's certainly how critics frame it. Instead of explaining how consciousness arises, it just asserts its basic existence.
And that goes against the principle of parsimony, maybe. Keeping your fundamental assumptions minimal.
You could argue that.
Yeah.
Adding a whole new fundamental category, consciousness, without a detailed account, feels like increasing the complexity of our basic picture of reality.
Without necessarily giving us more explanatory power about consciousness itself.
Precisely. It describes a universe where consciousness is fundamental, but doesn't make the nature of that consciousness any less mysterious. And this leads directly into another huge problem.
Which is?
The combination problem.
Ah, okay. So if electrons and quarks have their tiny micro-consciousnesses, how do they all add up to my consciousness? This unified, single experience I'm having right now.
Exactly. How do countless points of micro-experience combine to form a seamless field of macro-experience? I don't feel like a pile of tiny consciousnesses.
No, definitely not. So what do panpsychists say about this? How does the combining happen?
Well, this is where it gets really difficult for them. They acknowledge it must happen. They postulate combination. But there isn't really a well-worked-out mechanism.
No clear explanation for how the magic happens.
Not one that satisfies most critics. And certainly, as our sources stress, no undeniable empirical evidence showing it does happen.
People sometimes use analogies, right? Like chemistry. Atoms combine to make molecules with new properties.
They do, but the analogy breaks down quickly. When hydrogen and oxygen combine to make water, the H and O atoms still exist within the molecule. They retain their identity, even if the molecule has new emergent properties like wetness.
Okay.
But with consciousness combination. Let's take that hypothetical electron with redness and another with blueness. If they combine to make purpleness, What happened to the original red and blue experiences?
Did they vanish? Get overwritten?
It seems they must have, right? Unlike the atoms in a molecule, the constituent micro-experiences don't seem to persist as themselves within the combined macro-experience. There's a lack of conservation almost.
That does sound incoherent. And what about the actual biology? Neurons in the brain?
That adds another layer of difficulty. We know neurons communicate across synapses. There's a physical gap, the synaptic cleft. They don't actually touch.
Right, neurotransmitters cross the gap.
So if the proposed mechanism for combination relies on, say, physical proximity or contact, how does consciousness combine across these gaps? How does the consciousness of one neuron link up with the next to form a larger whole?
Yeah, that's a puzzle. If simple closeness makes consciousnesses combine, it brings up that relatable question. Why doesn't my consciousness merge with someone I'm hugging or, physically intimate with?
Exactly. It suggests that physical closeness alone can't be the mechanism, or at least not in the simple way it's sometimes implied.
So the combination problem seems pretty serious.
It is. Some philosophers argue it's just as hard, maybe even harder, than the original hard problem that panpsychism was trying to solve in the first place. It's a major sticking point.
Okay, moving on. There's also a critique about a potential logical flaw. Something about confusing the perceiver and the perceived.
Yes, this is a more subtle, but I think quite powerful argument. The idea is that a panpsychism might be making a category mistake.
Oh, so?
It looks at the object of perception, say my body, and sees that it's made of particles. Then it concludes that the subject of perception, my consciousness, must also be made of corresponding micro-subjects.
Okay, let me try to grasp that. So we perceive our bodies are made of atoms and particles.
Right. That's a feature of the world as it appears to us, the structure we observe in the object of perception.
And panpsychism then says, because the object, my body, has the structure, the subject, my consciousness, must also have a similar compositional structure, made of little bits of consciousness.
Exactly. But consider an analogy our sources use.
Yeah.
Imagine seeing a person on a computer screen. The image is made of pixels.
Okay.
It would be a mistake, a logical leap, to conclude that the actual person being depicted is made of little squares, right? The pixelation is a feature of the representation, the screen's way of showing the person, not a feature of the person themselves.
Ah, I see. So the particles making up my body are like the pixels. They represent the structure of my body as perceived, perhaps at the limit of our perceptual or scientific resolution.
That's the argument. They're features of the image on our, let's call it, internal dashboard, or the screen of perception. Just because the representation of my body is particulate, it doesn't logically force the conclusion that my consciousness, the thing doing the perceiving, is also particulate or composed of micro-consciousnesses tied to those particles.
So the structure of the physical world we observe doesn't necessarily dictate the structure of the consciousness observing it.
Precisely. Conflating the properties of the representation with the properties of the thing represented, or in this case, the perceiver. It's a potential foundational flaw in the reasoning.
Okay, that's a really interesting point. Now, finally, there's the problem of physical incoherence. This sounds serious.
It is, because it suggests panpsychism clashes fundamentally with modern physics, specifically quantum field theory. And this isn't a new critique. Our sources say it's been understood in physics for decades, since at least the 1950s.
How does the clash arise?
Well, think about how panpsychism tries to explain separate minds. My mind is separate from yours because my brain is spatially separate from yours, right?
Seems reasonable.
And that separation relies on the idea that the micro-consciousnesses are tied to elementary particles, which are assumed to be localized things with boundaries contained within each brain.
Okay, like tiny billiard balls, each with its own little mind, staying inside my skull.
Sort of, yeah. But that picture of elementary particles as distinct, localized little bodies with sharp boundaries, that's not how quantum field theory sees them.
It isn't. How does it see them?
For every type of fundamental particle in the standard model, electrons, quarks, photons, all 17 types, physics, posits a corresponding quantum field.
With a field, like a magnetic field.
Similar idea, but more fundamental. These quantum fields aren't localized. They span the entire universe. They permeate everything, everywhere without spatial boundaries.
The entire universe.
Yes. And what we perceive as a particle, like an electron, it's not a separate little thing. It's an excitation, a ripple, a localized vibration of that underlying universe-spanning electron field.
Like a wave on an ocean. The wave is just the ocean doing something locally.
Excellent analogy. The ripple is just the lake doing something. The electron is just the electron field doing something. at a particular location, the fundamental reality isn't the particle, it's the field.
Okay. So if consciousness is supposed to be a fundamental property, as panpsychism claims,
Then logically, it should be a property of the truly fundamental thing, which is the quantum field, not the particle excitation.
right. But if the fields span the entire universe,
And you have a major problem explaining individual minds. If consciousness is a property of the electron field, and the electron field is everywhere,
then there isn't my electron field consciousness and your electron field consciousness. There's just one universal electron field consciousness.
exactly. And since there are 17 fundamental fields in the standard model, you'd end up with 17 distinct universal consciousnesses, each permeating everything.
Wow. So the electron field in my brain is literally the same field that's in your brain, in that star over there.
According to quantum field theory, yes, the field is unitary and universal. The excitations, particles, are localized, but the field itself is not.
So under this view, panpsychism completely fails to explain why my consciousness feels separate from yours. Because the proposed fundamental carriers of consciousness, the fields are shared by everything.
That's the core of the physical incoherence argument. To be consistent with modern physics, panpsychism seems unable to account for the individuality and spatial boundaries of minds, which was one of his primary goals.
What about that de Broglie-Bohm theory? Does that offer a way out? Our sources mentioned it briefly.
Ah, yes. The pilot wave theory. It does posit particles with definite locations and trajectories guided by a wave, so it has particles with boundaries.
So maybe panpsychism could work with that physics.
Theoretically, perhaps. But de Broglie-Bohm theory has significant problems of its own. It's not the standard interpretation. De Broglie himself abandoned it for a while, and crucially, it's very difficult, maybe impossible, to make it compatible with Einstein's special relativity.
And reconciling quantum mechanics with relativity is pretty important, right?
Absolutely essential for modern physics. And that reconciliation almost always leads you back to quantum field theory, with its spatially unbound fields. So pinning hopes on de Broglie-Bohm is generally seen as relying on a less plausible fringe interpretation of physics to save the philosophical theory.
Okay, so relying on it is problematic.
Very. Most physicists would say that the quantum field picture is much better established and necessary for consistency with relativity.
All right, so wrapping up our critique of constitutive panpsychism, it seems to face quite a few hurdles.
Indeed. Let's quickly recap.
First, it doesn't seem to explain consciousness, just adds it to the list of fundamentals. A description, not an explanation.
Correct. Second, the combination problem. How micro-consciousnesses combine to macro-consciousness remains deeply puzzling, perhaps incoherent, lacking a clear mechanism or evidence.
Third, the potential logical flaw. Confusing the structure of the perceived object, particulate body, with the structure of the perceiving subject, consciousness.
Yes, the pixelation analogy. And finally, the physical incoherence. Its reliance on a picture of localized particles seems incompatible with quantum field theory, which suggests universal fields, making individual consciousness hard to explain.
So if mainstream physicalism struggles with the hard problem and constitutive panpsychism struggles with, well, all of that, where does that leave us?
That's the big question, isn't it? It suggests we might need to look at even more different approaches, perhaps frameworks that challenge our assumptions even more deeply.
Which brings us to what we might explore next time.
Precisely. If both these views fall short, perhaps we need to consider something like analytic idealism. This view talks about reality potentially being grounded in something like a spatially unbound field of subjectivity, or maybe even a universal mind.
Okay, that sounds significantly different. And you mentioned a key distinction we should keep in mind.
Yes, it's crucial. Panpsychism, as we've discussed, says everything is conscious in some basic way. Analytic idealism, which we'll delve into, tends to argue that everything is in consciousness.
Everything is conscious versus everything is in consciousness.
It's a subtle shift in language, but it leads to a profoundly different worldview. Understanding that distinction is key to grasping the alternative we'll explore.
Okay, so a final thought for our listeners to ponder until then.
Absolutely. If reality isn't fundamentally made of little bits of matter, some inert, some maybe with tiny minds, if that whole picture is wrong, what is the fundamental nature of things? What does that imply about our own minds, our connection to each other, and our place in the cosmos?
A lot to think about. If the world isn't built from the bottom up with little conscious bits, what are the other possibilities?
Exactly. Let that question simmer. We'll pick it up in our next deep dive.